You're listening to The Freight Break on the BCS Freight Network with your hosts, Josh Haynes and Paul Gibson.
It's time for The Freight Break. I'm your host, Paul Gibson, and your other host, Josh Haynes. How's it going, man?
It's going. Another episode, seeing your face, talking about things, trucking, still trucking, you know?
Yep. It never stops. But yeah, summer does. Kids going back to school, people taking kids to college. It is that time of year. So that's super fun. Been going through that. It's a good time.
Now, is it just because we're older, or is it just because it was a while back? I feel like summer just flew by altogether. At least for me. Did it feel like it flew by for you?
Yeah, I mean, everything feels like it flies by now. I'm old.
I mean, when we were kids, man, I swear summer felt really long. But then again, I guess school did come up really quick, and then it always just felt like you had no time to do anything. So,
Well, I mean, summer was like almost like a separate reality. But back when you didn't work every day, but we don't get those now, so it's all kind of a blur. I think it's where they get the whole blink and you miss it thing. But speaking of blinking and missing it, news is, I think, different from when we were kids. It's a 24-hour news cycle. Sometimes it feels like a 12-hour news cycle. Sometimes it feels like different news cycles. And one thing that we found ourselves in is the freight media game a little bit. And it's wild.
Which also feels like it is a 24-hour news cycle. It's like if for some reason you detach yourself from normal media for just a little bit, which is very hard to do because it is everywhere.
Also healthy, though.
Yeah. It's like, it feels like the freight news is the same. Like when I go on vacation, I have to detach from so many things to try to get a full detox, because it feels like it's 24-hour news cycle here, 24-hour news cycle with our job. It's happening so fast, man. I have a hard time keeping up with it.
Yeah, I mean, especially even Monday, the day we're recording this, finding out that Descartes bought Thai. That was that just popped. Stuff pops up all the time. And, everything going on with the Strait of Hormuz, and then fuel prices, and then capacity, going nuts because of the non-domicile stuff, and then on top of that, it's an election year, so that's already started. You been getting those campaign ads yet? I've started to get a couple.
I have not got the campaign ads yet. I will tell you, for the first time ever, speaking of elections, I did not plan this. I've never had this issue before. So I'm going out of town right after our summit, right? I forgot I will be out of town on a cruise on November 3rd, which is election time. So I'm having to now, make sure I'm well prepared so I can vote and, do a mail-in ballot. I've never had to do that before. That's a whole new thing for me, man. So I feel like I'm getting more prepared for the election stuff earlier than I ever would before, right? And now that I say this, anything about election, I'm sure Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, all my feeds are just going to have ads popping up now that I'm saying this, because it's listening. So I'm sure I'll have a lot.
It's like, oh, I think I heard him say he's election ready. Let's go. Yeah, no, and that's going to get, at the same time, it's, that always gets heavy, like news wise, but I feel like for the freight end of things, it actually slows down a lot of stuff, and it has. It's like we talked about it the other day, like Delilah's Law and stuff like that. People are so adamant about it and all into it when there's like weekly updates, but now that it's to the point of just like sitting on a table waiting to be legislated, people are like, meh. That's why I think we don't get a lot of stuff done. But that's where it's at. Everybody's that's coming up, but I think in the freight media game, there's a lot of, in the trucking media game, because I think they're separate. I think trucking media and freight media are separate. There's some crossover, but it's interesting to see, the types and the styles. And a lot of people, will like go, like Freightwaves or transport topics or landline or, us or like, Charles's stuff and like Casey and everybody on Sirius, and me sometimes, and our guest today, Thomas Wasson. They'll look at it and they'll get different takes from different people sitting in different places. Much like we try to give perspective from different places. But sometimes it's interesting, like when those things don't line up. But I also think it kind of shows that like certain parts of the industry don't line up with each other, and it's also the demographic of who those news sources are for.
Yeah, I also think that's where a lot of the issues and things don't get passed is where it's not trendy or it's not. I don't want to say things don't get passed every time if it's not benefiting everyone, but it does feel like that at times, that if this bill or this certain thing doesn't impact me, I'm not really as excited about it. And I don't want to say everyone was on the bandwagon with some of these bills that were earlier on and that we talked about, but it does feel like at times that people were very much like, let's get this done, until they realized maybe it's not going to impact them quite as much. Am I wrong in that?
No, and I think there's a lot of stuff with some of those bills that people would look at and say like, oh, that actually is a good idea, but there's stuff in there that I might not like. That happens too.
I don't remember what movie it was. I think it was called The Long Shot, and it was a movie, and it was about like all political things, right? And it was supposed to be this person that was going to be president, and they were running for it, and they had these main things: save the trees, save the bees, save the oceans, all these things. That was like what their campaign was that they were running. And then they figured out very quickly that to save the trees, they had to get rid of the Save the Bees Act, and to save the oceans, they had to get rid of the Save the Trees Act. And it was like, it was really mind blowing, but also like I kind of knew, but it was just interesting seeing it from a perspective of how things change from where they started, the origin of how it started to where it honestly ended up. And I do feel like that's where a lot of these bills maybe come on a table, and they've got good intentions behind it, and then a lot of things leech onto it, right? And then it just looks like a completely different bill by the end of it. And then I feel like things don't get passed because it looks so different,
Or if it only helps one group of people, then it doesn't pass at all. Like driver bathroom bills.
Right. And it's like, why don't we just put bills through that are more simple, easy, and get just passed and done? And I really do think sometimes the answer to that is because people want to also get their back scratched at the same time. Otherwise, we would just have a lot of these bills pass, like the bathroom one. It would just be straightforward. Why is this not passed? Because they want to litter it with multiple other things attached to that bill. So then it gets held up, and then they take their time, or it's like,
well, even most of those have been clean. But the thing about a clean bill is there's usually not money behind it.
Right. Yeah, unfortunately. So the news, the 24-hour news cycle, and what feels like also the 24-hour freight news cycle and the trucking news cycle is very rampant all over. And a lot of it is, some of it's very good. Some of it is also exhausting, like,
Right. And some of it, I feel like some of it's money driven, and some of it's just, it is what it is. And I think value is important in that, and what you get out of it. And, I think that being transparent is super important. And I think there are people who beat narratives in there, because it is beneficial to people. But then there's also people out there doing it, the right way. And I think that it's pretty interesting. And over time, you can kind of start to tell the difference, in who's who and who's reliable, or who's, there's certain people that you can almost find that are unreliable, but they're unreliable in reliable ways. So you know what to look for. It's like, oh, if they say this, they're probably not right, and then you kind of get a vibe, it's like track records and stuff like that. But I think there's kind of a mysticism when it comes to media. And, a lot of people think it's just, people just going out there and, like saying stuff, and throwing spaghetti at a wall, seeing what sticks. There's a lot of people that are like, they're all motivated, or they don't know what they're talking about, that kind of stuff. And I think it's a lot more detailed and a lot more complicated than that. And I think one of the best people to talk to in the game is Thomas Wasson. He's super objective. He's got a lot of experience sitting in a lot of different seats in transportation on both the broker and the carrier side. And yeah, and he's out there doing a lot of stuff. And his big deal is, less investigative and more just like almost like curiosity. Like he wants to learn and he wants to teach. So I'm pretty excited to have him on the show today.
Yeah, which I love that because we're both very much like you should always be learning something new. And that's normally when you impact change, right? Is learning something and not just going into a situation assuming that you know everything. So I'm pumped. I've met him a couple times. I know you've known him way longer than I have, but I am excited, and we're going to dive into that deep conversation when we get right back on the Freight Break.
In freight, the best opportunities don't come from another email. They come from a conversation. That's why hundreds of industry leaders come together at the Broker Carrier Summit. If you're serious about building stronger partnerships and staying ahead in freight, this is where you need to be. Join us at the Broker Carrier Summit, October 27th through 28th in Dallas, Texas. Register now at brokercarriersummit.com.
All right, and we're back on the Freight Break. So this is pretty exciting. Josh, we've got who I have nicknamed for good reason, and you're about to find out, the Gandalf of Freight, Thomas Wasson.
I love it. We need air horns for that. Is there like a way to have the air horns, or I just need to make the noise because it's expensive? Like, bear, 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 bear,
There you go.
I don't think we need air horns. I think we need like some like Lord of the Rings music or something.
No, that's copyright. That's copyright. We don't got the rights for that.
The Suno version of the intro to Skyrim.
I'm not that pretty. I don't think I'm worth the tens of thousands for that. So we'll just have to picture it in our mind's eye.
All right. Yeah. Picture the sound. See this. I can see the sounds. Yeah.
So if you're Gandalf of Freight, where's all the gray? Where's the robe, man? Where's the staff? Where is it?
I have a bathrobe I normally work in. I have like a really nice robe, but I mean like it's a little. It needs to be washed, so I would look a little. I'd look like a Santa Claus. I'd look like, remember that Santa Claus movie with he was in Escape from New York, the actor,
Kurt Russell.
Kurt Russell. Yeah. I'd look like a very malnourished Kurt Russell.
I love that.
To Santa Claus.
So what you're saying is there's just no pants from the desk down. Don't stand up. I don't want to have to do any blurring in post, but this just.
Yeah, I got some Lulu sweats. That way I can pretend like I'm cool.
All right.
Takes one to know one. Or maybe that's just me. Anyway, but I think what's important is to kind of get on with the show a little bit. But Thomas, freight media. A lot of people think that they know what it's like, but they don't. It's wild. And there is, the obvious, you write the story, you get the story, you talk to people, you find out things, you tell people things, you make predictions, you do blah, blah, blah. But a lot of people do it and get into it, but they don't actually really have a lot of experience in the freight industry or in the trucking industry. Let's talk about your experience real quick. What all have you done? Like, how'd you get here?
It's a wild ride. So I guess the first thing I want to encourage folks is everyone I talk to, if you'd have talked to me like 5, 6, I've been at Freightways like 5 years now. If you'd have talked to me like 10 years ago and you'd be like, yeah, you're going to be spending your time at home, you're going to talk on a podcast, you're going to be doing all this freight stuff, I'd be like, get the hell out of here. Get out of here. I firmly believe, so I was supposed to be in the Army back in college, full ride scholarship. I screwed that up. I ran too slow. So I got through 4 years and I did not make it to get my commission. So I graduated and it's 2013. And then my college girlfriend leaves me because I basically turned into a bum. I was working as a security guard at a polysilicon construction site in Cleveland, Tennessee. And I was like, man, what do I like do with my life? Because for 4 years, like Eagle Scout, all this service stuff, I had my whole idea of like lined out, and then it just fell apart. And I was like, well, crap. So I met my girlfriend, now wife, obviously 10 plus years later. And
well, and that also tracks, because looking like a malnourished Kurt Russell and trying to be a security guard and prevent people from stealing things doesn't seem like it goes together.
It didn't work. I tried to be a cop too. And so this is me at like 155, and I was 125. So I was like, I was really gaunt. And, the problem was my dad said I get beat up by like meth heads. And so I applied to the police departments because my dad was in the sheriff's department, and I got beat out by a bodybuilder and a Marine Corps, not a corpsman, but an Army medic, or just a Marine. Because, Navy corpsman, different thing. Someone's going to correct us on this. But, that was when I realized law enforcement wasn't for me, because I would simply get beat up. So I needed to use my brain more. And that's how, fast forward, I'm the security guard. I wanted to get in like the Navy or something. I thought maybe I just need a service branch that like I don't have to run. And then I ended up in trucking. So there's this job at US Express called After Hours Extended Coverage. You're a dispatcher. You work 3 12-hour shifts. So I did Thursday, 12, Saturday and Sunday, 12 hours. And that was like my first year. And I was like, well, I'll work this. I'm making more money than a security guard. I'm going to give this a go. And, I was like, I still thought I was going to do something else. And that's how trucking is. That's the best part. The first step is you end up in trucking. Everyone who ends up in trucking does not necessarily wake up and do trucking. Now, there are people who do. My dad would, there'd be like my father, my mom, my family members were truckers. There is a generational thing. But in the office side, I was like, hell, this is a job. It pays nearly as much as a lieutenant, and I work like 3 days a week. Let's rock and roll. I guess I'm making progress. And I did that for a year and a half. I was so bad. I didn't know what deadheading was. I was in it's a call center. I had 300 trucks. For the first 6 months, I was just really smooth-brained, is probably the best way to describe it. There's 2 people, Donnie Lofty and R.L. Thompson at U.S. Express at the time. Without them sitting across the table from me and answering nonstop questions, I totally would not be here. So that's my second part. I started in trucking, and I started rotating around. So by a year and a half in at U.S. Express, I helped them out enough to get teams. They're like, come to the days. So I come to daytime. I'm a team fleet manager. I do that for about a year. And they're like, okay, well, you seem pretty smart, and you seem to be doing well with this aspect. And I was like, well, let me try to be a load planner. So I get to be a load planner. I do that for a year. And then they're like, well, how about you learn to be a freight analyst? Because I'm always, as soon as I feel comfortable enough in a job, I'm like, what more can I learn? So I become an analyst, and then I work at night. And then fast forward, finally, near the end of my 5 years at US Express, I was a truckload network design manager. And what that means is I had 2,500 assets, and my job was to haggle, kind of like what I do now in media. I haggle with different departments to try to make cool stuff happen. And so, how do you get 2,500 trucks to actually make sure they're running the right thing? And if you're sourcing the right stuff, that was the big question. You change 1 or 2 little things, you make a lot of money. So that was my stint at Mega Carrier. I did 5 different jobs, fleet operations. And so near the end of it, I was like, well, I'd like to try to become a freight broker. I could tell that this unique role was going to come to a close. Unfortunately, I did not understand corporate politics. I totally screwed that up. So that's the second time I've screwed up. I picked the wrong horse, and my senior VP and director got really pissed at me because I tried to change all their ELDs without knowing that it turns out they didn't want to do that. And ironically, years later, they did change ELDs. But I digress. I joined Arrive Logistics, and I was like, hell yeah, I'm going to be a freight broker now. I'm going to learn. And they're like, we're going to make you a capacity buyer because you've got some non-competes and stuff. You're going to need a few months for this to come off, like Grand Theft Auto. So I'm doing that, and I am humbled. I go from 2,500 assets, middle manager meetings, to literally, hey man, I've got this Atlanta to Chicago, click. And then the third phone call, hey man, I've got this Atlanta to Chicago, 1,000 more, click. And so for 6 months, I just ate butt. I don't know if we can swear on this. Can we swear on this?
Yeah.
Is this a swearable one?
Yeah, let it fly, man.
I ate so much ass. It was a lot of ass. Drivers were just verbally disrespecting me, and they had a right to, because I sucked. I was really bad. I was not a good capacity buyer.
I love the self-awareness.
You have to be. And that's the beauty of my story. As we're tying this up, it's okay to you don't have to be the best at one thing. The key thing is to be good enough at each one that by the powers combined, you are less crappy. You're less shitty, basically. And so COVID happened when I finally became an account executive, 2019. Get laid off in April. Soon as it does, I'm basically unemployed again. I'm like, well, I just screwed that up. So I try to consult some, and I help some companies get built. I go back, because you remember when it went down, joined Arrive, and then I worked at a company called AI Fleet. Marco Corey was the founder and he was like, hey, I saw you're no longer at US Express. You want to help me build this? I'd worked with them and AT Carney on the variant project. I was like, yeah, let's give it a go. And me, and then I was one of the first or second hires, a guy named Matt Gardner, great guy as well. I got him to join. They started scaling. And that was my experiences dispatching. I was there for like 9 or 10 months, and we built a small fleet of 5 or 10 trucks. And they got to like 75 or 100 by the time I left. But that was a great example of you get to see the very opposite end. So now I've been at a mega carrier. I've been at a freight brokerage. I've been at a trucking tech startup, that a small dispatching thing with, your 5 to 7 to 10 drivers. And then I started FreightWaves. So as we're wrapping up this thing, one of the things I saw was I'm working at the startup. Startup's hard life. It's a lot of work. When you work at a startup 60, 70, 80 hours a week, you do what you got to do. And I don't regret any of it. It was a phenomenal learning experience. I saw this job at FreightWaves, and it was like enterprise trucking expert. I'm like, well, my talent stack. I know that in the back of my mind, I learned I learned that you just need to keep learning new things and it will somehow help. And so I was like, well, I'd love to learn how to communicate like I'm doing now. Not by, not like, yes, but like communicate and articulate, because I want to tell these stories. And so I started at FreightWaves. And by the way, I sucked at it the first 2 years. I was an analyst that wrote some newsletters. I never knew how to do newsletters. And then I learned the newsletters, and I learned to do the Sonar Market stuff. And then 2 years ago, Alan Adler retired, and I took over to become a writer. I'd never learned to be a writer. So I was like Mowgli from the Jungle Book, dude. I was like Tarzan being paraded around London, and they were like, look at this boy. He knows nothing about writing. So I had to go to press pools, and I started learning how to write. And I was like, please teach me other outlets. How do you do things? What are these? And then I got more comfortable, and here I am. I'm a writer, and I'm an analyst. I'm a lot of different things, but I want listeners to understand that, you got to keep an open mind. You just never know where it's going to go.
That's wild. And sometimes that's the best way to get anywhere, I think. As someone who also, Josh included, also didn't mean to get into trucking. It just kind of happened.
Yeah. You're preaching to the choir here, man.
But it's fun. It's so much fun.
I got hired to make a video, and here I am,
I did.
6 years later.
I was told this was a very stable, things didn't get crazy industry when I got hired. Little did I know that is not true.
Little did they know.
No, and I went to a party, and someone was like, I made friends with a guy, and he was like, oh, you're looking for a job? Check this out. And I ended up being a driver recruiter. But, well, that's a great start for basing on what we're about to talk about, and we will get into the meat of it when we get right back here on the Freight Break.
The future of cross-border freight is happening in Laredo, Texas. February 18th through 19th. Join carriers, brokers, shippers, technology providers, and industry leaders at the Cross-Border Connector. Build relationships, discover opportunities, and stay ahead of the trends shaping cross-border logistics. Register today at bcsfreightnetwork.com.
And we're back after break on the Freight Break to break down Thomas Wasson. Well, not break him down, but yeah, you get it.
The trucking industry does that enough, man.
Yeah, we don't need to do
I already lost my hair from it too, guys. Come on. We're builders here. Where's the solidarity?
So you ended up I have a full head of hair. Josh doesn't.
No, it's thin up here, but it's full here.
Yeah.
I'm hoping to get that. I look like an angry Amish person who escaped the reservation if it gets too long. So one day.
I love that. Yeah, kind of like Seth Green in that one movie where he played an Amish guy. But yeah, no. So freight media, right? That's wild. So what is, now that we established you've done some of these other jobs, and what brokers do, and what dispatchers do, and people carriers, and etc. What does that look like now in comparison, the way that you view the industry?
I think it helps out. So when we talk about freight media, I work at FreightWaves. We are technically called B2B. We are business to business media. Some may call us a trade publication. We're very niche in terms of our specialization. I report on supply chain things. I don't really report on politics or lifestyle or other stuff. So that was the first thing I had to learn was, what am I writing and doing? Well, I'm a B2B trade press. FreightWaves is one of the largest ones, and we happen to do a lot of cool things. And I happen to write on Sonar, high frequency data. So I'm a data analyst who writes market stuff, and I'm a writer who writes cool stuff. So that's the first thing. The second thing is just when I'm in press pools, a lot of people in media started in journalism. They went to school, they went to a J school for journalism school, and they are writers who happen to write on trucking. So that's a big differentiator. A lot of folks, when you're understanding the positives and negatives of media, is that, who's the people writing it. And so, I do feel like it's an advantage because when I'm asking questions, when I'm talking to people like you all, when I'm doing interviews, you can finally understand more to ask the right questions to make better articles, at least in my personal opinion. Now, my stuff may not be the best in the world, but, I do think the value. So that's the key thing with media. There's, we could dive into all the conspiracies and all the other stuff because obviously looking from the outside in, it looks a lot more exciting than it really is. But I think that's the key thing to set the standard is, B2B trade media that focuses on trucking. And it's a very fascinating space.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, we've got a lot of experience with the like, not necessarily B2B, but like, to like, so we both worked at CDL Life. We talked to like the driver audience. We obviously work with Charles Gracie, who talks to a driver audience. And we've put a lot of more stuff towards audiences, but we've also done some B2B stuff through the video company that I ran and Josh's previous experience with video. A lot of B2B, and now Broker Carrier Summit, that's all pretty much B2B. So I definitely get the difference there. But one thing I would ask with that and doing B2B stuff and doing analyzation, it seems like with freight media, there's a lot of people with very motivated answers and outcomes and stuff like that, because it seems like it's wrong a lot.
Yeah. And, so let's boil it first down to incentives. It turns out freight media and media in general, if you're not careful, you can get a huge ego. That's very common. I joke that the force is kind of this media. The force exists everywhere. Information is the force. Are you going to be a Jedi or a Sith? I prefer to be a Jedi. I want to create content. I want to write articles that you may not always agree with what my interviewee is saying, but I want you to learn something. I want you to take something away. That's the key thing. I want to give you something for free. And then by giving something for free, you're going to look at FreightWaves, and then FreightWaves, by extension, says we have a great audience because we make great stuff. Would you like to advertise? Because unfortunately in media, any media, by the way, you got to create an audience by making value. So you can't suck at that. The second part is out of that value, people want to sell to these subsets. That's the B2B part. And so a lot of what we do is helping with demand and lead generation. So, the first step is people will accuse, oh, this is a conspiracy. They're paying for this and that and doing all of this. There's not. I can write about what I want to write about. I think that's one of the things that you'll see with contributor work and other stuff. I'm a W-2 employee. I write about stuff. If it does well, I get paid. If it doesn't do well, I get paid, but I have to provide value and I do interviews. So, that's one of the key things. The ego part is very fascinating because imagine this. It is dangerous because people will recognize you. And then people will be like, hey, Thomas, can you do work for me? Because that's the thing. I have to report. I'm incentivized to provide you all with informative stuff, but also every person I talk to basically is asking me to do work for them. So that's where you can kind of get a little bit of an ego. You're like, look at me. I can pick and choose, oh, I'm so important. So I think one of the things behind the scenes is really, a lot of these journalists, think of it like cooking. It's really like making sandwiches. I make content just like a hamburger shop, just like McDonald's makes burgers. I make content. And so you have to remind yourself that, am I making good content? Am I making useful things? Because if I start thinking that I'm somehow a steak joint and I'm a 5-star Michelin thing, I'm not going to make good stuff because I'm going to be too uppity. But we see that in freight media because it's so niche that there is more opportunity for you to have egos in the podcast and the circuits and the tours and the agencies. But, at the end of the day, it is the weirdest job in the world because I'm in my home right now. I'm chilling in an office. I write and I don't get a lot of human interaction during the week. I'm out here just doing some interviews, writing up a transcript. 1,000 words here, 1,500 words there. I think drivers and listeners and audiences think there's some grand conspiracy when really it's like building a sandcastle every day and someone knocks it over. And then you just got to build another sandcastle. And then you need more sand. And then you got to go out and find more sand. And so it seems to be very exciting, as if I'm somehow privy to all of this. Now, you can be privy via Access Journalism to learn stuff, but it is not like it's not like Deep Throat and all the President's Men, where we're like embargo, the Nixon tapes and stuff like that.
Right.
It's very boring and glamorous. Yeah, I may be talking about last mile solutions in the final mile space with refrigerated and dynamic routing. I mean, like it's like C-SPAN.
Right. Which, I'm not going to lie. I may or may not watch sometimes recreationally. But I'm into that, So, yeah, and that's what I mean. I think a lot of people make assumptions about that sort of thing, that it is, like, it's like, because, I mean, and to be fair, a lot of times in more major media outlets, in general spaces, there is a lot of motivated reporting. But I don't see a whole lot of that as much in the transportation space.
Yeah, and it's incentives. So, like, if I was at the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or other outlets that are much larger, I'm not going to, now I'm prefacing this. I'm not going to say, I don't know what goes on over there, but I'm going to say there's a lot more attention that you can get and more opportunities for you to figure out the type of content and the type of writer you want to be. There's a lot of different types of journalism. I think that's important. There's advocacy journalism. That's where you're trying to write and say the drivers should get paid minimum wages. And if you're not doing this, I'm going to interview some drivers. I'm rooting for the drivers, so I'm going to do a feature piece on that. I'm going to advocate for something. There's accountability journalism. Rob Carpenter is one of the best accountability journalisms. He is so good. He has the receipts. He does not need to ask for, you can ask for a comment, but at the same time, it's like you're dead and you don't know it yet. I've got your whole connection. I've got it mapped out. What I do is what's called access journalism. I'm making a bet. My bet is that I will write things that will be, there's always a slant in media. My slant is I'm going to interview, let's say, Paul or Josh about specific things that BCS is doing in the media space to learn about other things, or your podcast is doing. It's a single source feature, but at the same time, I'm going to make sure that when you all talk to me, it has to provide value to the reader. My bet is that by getting more access by working through agencies and outlets, I can get you unique information that you otherwise could not get. There's a bet there, but there's also a risk, because you have to be very cognizant that you're like, obviously you're like FBI. It's like the Departed. We're going undercover. You're deep undercover. You're embedded. We call that embedded journalism. And so, it takes me a little longer, but the output's going to be a lot higher than me just taking a press release and here's a hot dog. Here's 300 words. And so, when drivers and listeners and people are very skeptical, there's always an angle. You've got an angle. You want to get paid more as a driver. You got an angle. You're going to promote yourself. Media is the same way. Companies have angles as part of their PR campaigns. Advertisers, advocates, lobbying firms. It's a battlefield, the information warfare battlefield. So that's why I say it's the force, because you can't escape the force. The force is everywhere. And so what you do have to recognize is, how will you use that power? How will you use that platform? All forms of journalism have this incentive and access problem. Hell, they used to get mad at J-School on some of their finals. If you took food from the event, they would fail you because they say that would influence your outcome. I'm like, are you serious? Like, taking the food? It's catered. They already paid for it. That's a separate budget. There's more ways to bribe somebody than just eating a sando. And I think that's where traditional media is starting to fail, is like, with these podcasts and with these citizen journalists and everybody else getting a platform, you no longer can be acting that way. You got to work the corner like everybody else. You got to try a little bit harder. You got to provide that value, because I promise you, there's a lot of people on the X platform, the Freight X community. There are folks who are doing more work there than a lot of legacy outlets, and their content is phenomenal. It's just we're seeing this dynamic change in the game. And so, there's always going to be game. There's always going to be incentives. There's always going to be who knows this and that. But your job is to try to do the best you can to be as informative and factual. And that's what I really believe in. And that's what I've had to learn over the past 2 years.
No, I love that. And you're seeing more and more of those people that you're talking about actually pop up and take some of these legacy spots, which is wild. But yeah, and we'll get more into that when we get back on the Freight Break, and we'll see what the industry looks like from that perspective. Hi. This isn't part of the show. This is supposed to be an ad. This could be your ad if you want to sponsor it. You could sponsor this spot right here. This could be your time to shine. And, get your brand all across the entire BCS Freight network. So, if you want to sponsor us, hit me up. Do you think that one's going to work? Okay, and that was a much needed word from the people to pay the bills. But we are back on the freight break, and so Thomas Wasson is here. We've talked about how he got here, what freight media is like versus what people actually view it as, because a lot of people have weird, and very distinct views on it. Some people don't have a view on it; they just take it in. But then there's a lot of people who have questions. Hopefully, we answered a lot of those. And now, Thomas, the whole podcast is about getting different people's perspectives who sit different places in the industry. Just a quick overview. What is your perspective of the industry at the moment? Try to keep it short.
No pressure. Biggest change since the Motor Carrier Act of 1980. We are going through, the pandemic, the freight boom, the freight bust, and now we are seeing a new generation of, what's it mean to be a driver? New forms of media, proliferation of freight podcast and driver commentary. If there ever was a time to be a driver and get your voice heard, or even in the supply chain industry, this is really the time. And I'm excited for it because, compared to previous years, this information was locked away behind, various groups. Usually it was hidden within trade organizations. So that way, their members would be educated. Now we're seeing a lot of stuff for free. So it's like the Wild West that, remember in Deadwood when the train started coming and it changed the West? That's what's happening right now. It's the end of the Old West. And for better or worse, we're going to see a new form via AI and technology, like a railroad. It's changing it. It's just really early. It's really hard to tell right now.
Yeah, and I'd agree with that. And as someone, in my 2026 projection said, the only way that the market's going to go all the way, actually up sustainably is with structural change. It's been wild to actually see that. The market hasn't gone up necessarily, but there has started to actually be, for the first time since then, legitimate structural change.
And that's why we see the media. Who wants to become the speaker of the driver? That's why it gets so catty. And, when you see people picking at each other and slinging mud and other stuff, just remember that there's opportunity there to try and position yourself in marketing. A lot of these battles are marketing. The egos, the outlets, the other stuff. You're trying to market yourself as the niche for what you want to do. So I report on autonomy, EVs, last mile, freight technology. That's kind of my niche. I don't really foray into, I'll talk about driver issues as an analyst or an expert, but I'm smart enough to know that I didn't pay my dues in the seat of a truck. I can provide you certain information, but I think that's where we see a lot of the battles, because sometimes, as when I told you about the ego and you get all this attention, we see that in other outlets and other podcasts, even for politics and other stuff. If you're not careful, you'll see mission creep. You started as a health influencer. Now you're talking about politics. Now you're deciding that you're a geopolitical analyst because your audience demands it. One thing I want to focus on is that, for me, I stick in my little niche. I talk in my lane. There's value in my niche, but I think that also saves it. You have to knowingly decide how far down this rabbit hole do you want to go. And so for me, I think that's one of the things why when drivers are like, there's a grand conspiracy and, they're all colluding to do this. And, the most collusion is a company sends out a press release and then 5 outlets report it in 5 different ways. That a lot of the times you would see things that may actually have been sponsored ad operations. So sometimes lead gen, I think sometimes you would get confused because companies will pay for things, but typically their job is to collect emails and demand gen. A large TMS provider wants to make a white paper so that way they can have people to sell to. Or they'll come on and do an article sponsored by this person where they want to talk about a release. And so because of how the drivers and the users feel about the product, they'll say, oh, that must be, a horrible conspiracy. When in fact, it's always been that way in media. There is editorial and then there's a sales group. And so it's kind of like a Chinese firewall between having, your equity people and your buy side and sell side. There are companies do work with it. I mean, look at all the sponsors for you go to any conference, they're sponsors. So I think that's where people get it confused the most, is the difference between the sponsored and editorial. But yeah, at the end of the day, the situation's changing so much for drivers. I'm excited about it. I'm happy to see more drivers talk. I'm excited to see more voices. Even on the X platform, we have all these folks, freight tech, people vibe coding in the space. It can seem like it seems worse, but this is actually a good sign. We want to have a very lively discourse, because for the past 10 or 15 years, I'd have to look at old Transport Topics magazines when I first started back in 14, because there just wasn't a Freight Waves and other stuff like that. So, it's a net good, but it's also going to feel bad because everyone's now fighting for the street cred, and it can get ugly, man. You piss in somebody's sandbox or cornflakes, they get really mad.
Oh, it's wild. I've seen it. I've seen it happen. From row seat to it a couple times.
And it's just branding and engagement. And that's where you also have to be careful is, you as a driver, a listener, a consumer of information, also be very, think of the quality of your ingesting. Is this there to outrage me? Am I being used for eyeballs, or am I learning something? That's what we see a problem now, is the too much noise. You can use AI, you can make AI products, but are you doing engagement slop? Is this empty calories, or is this quality stuff? And in this information environment, while I did say I'm very excited that we're seeing more voices, we are also seeing more folks who will provide empty calories and stir the pot, and then they'll claim their street cred by just pissing off a lot of people. And then when they actually try to talk about it, it turns out they don't know what they're talking about. All they're good at is just pissing people off for eyeballs.
Right. No, and I mean, I still think there's sometimes with the rage. I think sometimes it's not bad, because sometimes people are uncovering things that people don't like. Like, a good one is Danielle Shavin or Shavin and Rob Carpenter. They pissed off a lot of people, but they're kind of doing some good work. Our own buddy Charles Gracie pisses off a lot of people. But usually it's in the act of exposing something, or like pointing out something that, like people are trying to sweep under the rug, or like not bring attention to. It's like, oh, you did all this cool stuff, but like, that sucks. But then, yeah, there's people out there that are just trying to like piss people off because, they figured out that rage baiting works really well for engagement.
And that's why you want to look at it. For folks like Carpenter and Chafin and them, they have the receipts. And so it's like when you go shopping for your beef or other stuff. Is this thing, do you know where it's bought? Do you know where this information is coming from? If they provide you with the receipts, yeah, you can be pissed about uncomfortable truths, because that is, accountability journalism in its purest form. I have the receipts. I don't like this. This is why I don't like it. That's a good argument. Whether you agree or not agree, that is good. Now, if you're just like, yeah, man, screw these guys, they're just in it for this, they're just in it for the money. Is that quality? Did you add to the discourse, or are you just having cognitive dissonance because you don't agree with it? I think that's low calorie. You tell me why. Yeah, I don't like this because when I fueled up here, or when I did this, or when I spoke to this person, now you're adding some quality. You're adding context. It's like a kid. Why are you mad? Oh, I stubbed my toe. Or why are you mad? Oh, I don't know. It's like that online discourse. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. And so you do have to have, I think that's the key thing to think about as well from a media standpoint, because when I decide to post on social media now, I'm having to ask myself that same question. Hell, I had a great interview with a company I just spoke about, last mile refrigerated vans. And it's something that, like, this is really cool. I'm going to share my reporter's notes. I hope somebody learns something about that and that improves. So that's where you got to imagine yourself as well, as that, especially it's great that we have the media, but make sure that you're following the people who you feel give you value. And in this new day and age, that's the whole game. Legacy outlets are losing ground because, the quality of the product isn't as well as it used to be, or maybe slanting too much on one side or the other of the political spectrum. There's opportunities. There's gold in them there hills. Just make sure that the people you're backing have shovels and pickaxes and aren't just standing on the side commenting on how some guy's digging and they just don't like the fact that they're digging.
For sure. No, that's absolutely. And it's one of those things. It's time. Like, people, I've noticed that people are either, no pun intended, either in it for the long haul, or it is like a flash in the barrel. And that's, I think, another indicator is the longer people are around, usually the more legit
the half-life of an influencer is 2 to 3 years before audience capture. So if you want to be an influencer, you got 2 to 3 years. If you make it to 4 years, you're doing really well. That's why I think, going totally full circle, I was very lucky enough to work a lot of different jobs. I was very lucky enough to have a lot of unique experiences. Now that I'm working as a representative of a media outlet, my job is to share those stories with you and to share you those experiences. I hope by you reading that provides value and makes a difference, and hopefully your business or your decisions. that is something much different than people who say, I want to grow up and just be an influencer. You always have to provide value. So I think my parting message for folks is it's the media, the Wild West, and we've got a lot of opportunities in this media space, but be very cognizant. Are you providing value? Are you trying to do good? And good is relative. One guy's good as another guy's good as another guy's good. But as long as you try to put out informative stuff, I think at the end of the day, it makes everything better. So, you are what you eat. And hopefully we all just consume a little better content these days.
I love that. Now, that being said, real quick, where can people find you, Thomas? Because I would say that you are a healthy diet of information.
I get around. Freightwaves.com/Thomas Wasson. Look up Thomas Wasson. I write newsletters. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on the X platform. Sometimes I'm on SiriusXM. You do great work. I fill in on SiriusXM as well. You'll see me also as a guest. So check it out. And also check out, not just me and FreightWaves, check out all the other outlets that are working really hard to providing information. You want to have them all in a book. You don't want to just focus too much on one. You want to continue to source it. Just like when you go to the grocery store, you just don't want to buy a bunch of potato chips. You also got to think of like the food pyramid. Think of your information diet and make sure you curate it so that way you're getting positive outcomes, and then leverage that and make a talent stack.
Diversification is huge, and that is one thing that we are all about. That's why we, the BCS, it's like one of the primary things that we do. It's what we do here on the Freight Break is we want to get as many perspectives and as much input as possible to create the clearest picture we possibly can. So thanks for hanging out with us today, and we will see you next time.
You've been listening to the Freight Break on the BCS Freight Network. And now, you're not.